When we actually create a very transparent environment where the contractors actually control the project to deliver what they propose they can deliver because they're the expert, the change order rate as far as time and cost is under 1% that's caused by the vendor. And most people don't even know this. So they actually think that there's a problem in the industry because there are not enough people who are good at what they're doing. Yes, it's like a totally misperceived problem. And the risk is actually being caused not by the industry, but by the clients who buy the construction services.
Welcome to Conversations Around the Corner, where we talk to construction executives about who they are and how they got there, inspiring the next generation of construction leaders. My name's Matt.
And I'm Eric. Our guest today is Dr. Dean Kashiwagi, professor in Arizona State University's Del E. Webb School of Construction. He is a specialist and researcher in best value procurement and has conducted over 900 tests totaling $4.6 billion with a 98% success rate. He took his undergraduate degree from the University of Hawaii in civil engineering and his master's and Ph.D. in industrial engineering at ASU. He has served 14 years in the U.S. Air Force and has written over 100 articles and 11 books, including his most recent, How to Know Everything Without Knowing Anything. In our conversation today, we talk about how a procurement specialist orders seafood, analyzes the MBA, and what 3 things Dr. Dean would tell the top construction executives if he had 1 hour with them. We hope you enjoy the conversation. These are some quotes that we got from your students from the website Rate My Professor. So I'm going to read these to you real quick. Dr. Dean Kashiwagi is one of the most inspiring and life-changing professors I've ever had. Here's a second one. I am learning too much with him. This class is an adventure. From every hour you spend talking about the lessons in class, you will spend 5 thinking about and applying those lessons outside of class. And then the last one. One word, dominant. So Dr. Dean, what in the world are you teaching in your class that is getting these types of quotes from your students?
Well, we have a totally different philosophy. What we propose is that if somebody looks at reality and lives long enough and has enough experience, they will begin to realize that it's impossible to make someone understand something when it seems complex to the student. So our whole approach is to simplify, to minimize the need to think, which minimizes stress, and allows people to understand reality in a very simple manner. Our general rules for the class, which was a bone of contention with a lot of my peers, is that when somebody signed up for our class, we wanted to minimize the amount of work they did and minimize the amount of thinking they had to do. So the rules were very few. They had to come to class. They had to disconnect from their electronics. They would sit there, and we as the teachers made it simple. They were to listen, and whatever conclusion they came up with was always the right conclusion. And this is based on the logic of what we call information measurement theory, which is the foundation of the best value approach.
If you had to give us like a very quick couple-minute explanation of what best value procurement is, could you do that for us?
We'll make it even simpler. We'll talk about a simple, what we call event in reality. An event is something that has initial conditions and has final conditions. And the change over time of the event conditions is governed by natural law. So basically, anybody who's logical will accept what they observe in reality. We'll look at this and say, if somebody understands the initial conditions, they will be able to predict the final conditions.
Okay.
And if somebody sits there and says, well, what does this mean? Well, it means that the final conditions are actually set in the initial conditions, which means everything that is governed by natural law, and there is nothing that is not governed by natural law, is predictable. And if predictable, it can happen only one way. And this is supported by the evidence that everything we've ever seen in our lives or in the history of mankind has only happened one way, which means the final conditions of any event or the future is actually set in the past. And if somebody actually understood this, they can predict the future. Therefore, they can see into the future. Therefore, time loses its value to this type of person.
So in that model, uncertainty in the world exists where? Not understanding natural laws?
Uncertainty, or the concept that events or initial conditions can turn out into two sets of final conditions, is inaccurate. It's never happened. It never will happen. So basically, the confusion or the uncertainty or the risk is actually caused in people's minds who don't understand simple reality. There is no such thing as uncertainty. Uncertainty means that somebody lacks sufficient information to understand the initial conditions.
Right. Okay. So that search for information or lack of information, those are the big hurdles to overcome in your model.
In the model that we use, we want to always simplify. So you simplify when you find out that you don't understand something, which means by observation, you can't quickly understand reality and predict what's going to happen in the future. You should always go and call an expert who is good in that area that you have confusion about and have the expert tell you what's going to happen.
Practical application is explained in your best value procurement practices.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, the best value approach, which is the application of information measurement theory or accurate concepts of reality, is simply the identification and utilization of expertise.
When I was reading some of your work and listening to the seminar, it struck me as very similar to some of the work of Friedrich Hayek and his economic philosophy. I was interested, is any of your philosophy inspired by that?
Yeah, I have to be very honest with you. As I've gotten older, I've realized that there are very few people who actually understand reality. And so anybody who can accept reality as it is happening and understand it, their ideas are always going to be in congruence with what I'm talking about.
So you're not a reader of philosophy or a fan of any particular thinkers?
I am, if they can make it simple, if I can accept it by observation, and if they minimize my need to think.
Oh, that's interesting.
Because as I get older, I quickly realize it's not a good thing to make other people think. When you make people think, you increase their stress level. You force them to go get more information, which is utilization of energy, resources, etc. When in actuality, all they have to do is find an expert. And they know they found an expert when the expert can clearly identify what reality is and simply explain what's going to happen before it happens.
Do you think access to information with the internet has allowed us to find experts more easily, or is it more difficult with just an overabundance of information?
Well, the problem is not that whether we had the internet in past years and we have the internet today. The problem is in the amount of people who actually can identify reality for what reality is. In other words, logic tells you that because we have the internet, it should be much easier to identify and utilize expertise.
Mm-hmm. Right.
But that's not the limiting factor, although it will impact how smart people run their lives now and how it helps them to see into the future so that they don't waste their time and effort doing things that in the futures will be totally meaningless. If you truly understand this, if you look at society and say, do I have more observant people or more non-observant people? Observant people are people who can see something and don't have to think about it. Non-observant people are people who are more likely to get confused and immediately start thinking because that's what human beings do. They think. It's a natural law. People get confused, they start thinking.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And when they start thinking, they try to drive information to themselves. But because they're not an expert in it, it becomes very difficult to understand what information is accurate and what is inaccurate. They end up stressing out, finally making a decision based on their own background and understanding. And that is why non-observant people always increase the risk, increase the cost, and because they're not experts, do not increase the quality of what they're doing.
Is it possible for a non-observant person to become an observant person? And how does one become an expert?
Well, the first thing is, if the final conditions are set in the initial conditions, what is the biggest event that you see? In your lifetime, it's going to be you. And you were born. When you're born, were you different than other people? The answer has to be yes. Therefore, you're predisposed. So if you're predisposed, then you have certain criteria, certain, quote, characteristics that make up who you are and how you think. And because you're subject to natural laws, if somebody had all the information about you, you can now predict what's going to happen to that person before it happens. Which means everyone is different at birth, and they're differentiated by things like where they're born, who their parents are, birth order, the amount of resources the family has access to, the environment that they're born into, the way everyone's thinking around them. All these different factors define who they are. If the logic truly plays out, you can then take this information and predict what's going to happen to these people throughout their lives. So your question, can somebody now go from non-observant to observant? I would have to say without trying to describe, because of course we're on a spectrum here of the ability to observe and the ability to become observant. But if you're trying to make this simple, I would say that a non-observant person could never become an observant person. That's why it's predictable. In simplifying this, you quickly begin to realize, if you look in any sector of our country, any type of social group, or you expand this to any other countries, the natural law is the number of observant people are always very few. And how can you utilize this now? So you do not have to think as much. Simple. You're looking at all these concepts that are coming out to talk about leadership, talk about like how to improve our society, et cetera, et cetera. Anytime an idea is very popular, which means the majority of people actually believe it, the odds that it is accurate and will work is very low.
Yeah.
Because the majority of people are non-observant. So they like ideas that actually aren't logical because that's what non-observant people like.
Right.
So if it's very popular, you should quickly realize that it's probably not accurate and won't work. And that's why a lot of programs, both in education and in our government system, never work, because they're created by non-observant people and the ideas are inconsistent. They don't match reality. And over time, just won't work. And people will, quote, non-observant people will buy into these ideas simply because they can't see into the future.
Right. So you're not a fan of 51% wins the day, majority rule.
The majority, you're right, will always be non-observant. But because the event only happens one way, and no one actually loses, and no one can change anyone else, and everybody's accountable for what they do, the observant people will always win.
So then applying that to best value, you talk about bringing in experts. So you would define an expert as an observant person. Is that accurate?
Yes, I can make it even simpler. An expert is one who can identify the initial conditions and see into the future before it happens. By definition, if you have an observant person, you can quickly understand why they're observant. So we're going to kind of flip the tables on you here. I'm going to ask you the question, and I don't want you thinking, and you give me the answer.
Deal.
If I find an expert, do you agree he would be an observant person, or he or she?
Agreed.
If they're observant, are they more likely to think win-win or win-lose?
Win-win.
Are they more likely to believe in natural laws?
Yeah.
Are they more likely to increase or decrease their decision-making?
Decrease.
In fact, if an expert was almost a total expert or knew almost everything, how many decisions would they make?
Very few.
0.
So an expert thinks more or thinks less?
Less.
Will an expert, when they do something for you as a client or a customer, will they treat you exactly how they would treat themselves, or would they treat you differently?
How they treat themselves.
Therefore, is an expert and their actions predictable or not predictable?
Predictable.
You got it.
So, for example, let's say we take a specific trade on a construction site. There are going to be experts in that trade in general. But then if we drill down within that trade and we find one action within that trade, could there be more experts within that one action that might not be experts at the total trade?
Logic tells you that if you ask somebody to do just one thing instead of 5 things, you're going to have more people who could do the one thing.
Okay.
The overriding rule or natural law is that in every sector, whether it be a subtrade or a sub-subtrade or whether it be an industry, we'll always have very few experts. Therefore, the problem becomes of anybody who is trying to increase quality and decrease cost at the same time. Is the simplest way to explain this is the identification and the utilization, the effective utilization of expertise. And herein lies the crux of how to resolve issues. But human beings, number one, cannot identify expertise, even if it's in their own company, don't know how to effectively utilize that expertise, because common sense and logic tell you if you have an expert doing something, what % of the time do you want them doing your expertise?
I'd say all the time.
Yes. And this is where people stumble because they don't know how to utilize expertise.
When you go to a restaurant, how do you choose what to order?
At my stage in life where I know who I am, I tell somebody what I like to eat and ask them to tell me what would be the best thing for me to order.
So you have that conversation with the server?
Absolutely.
Huh, interesting. That's kind of what we would have thought.
Absolutely. And I can tell you, I got this experience, right? I go down to Tampa, Florida, and I go into the specific restaurant that is supposed to be the most outstanding seafood restaurant in Tampa. And I tell the server, I only eat fish. I don't eat meat at all. So I can only eat fish.
Okay.
But I'm born and raised in Hawaii, and I know what good fish tastes like.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, fish has to be cooked right. It has to be fresh. And I can tell if both those requirements have been met. He said, "Oh, not a problem, not a problem." I said, "So what do you recommend that I eat?" And he says, "I recommend our mahi-mahi." I said, "Okay, that's what I'll take." They bring it to me. It is the worst mahi-mahi that I've ever eaten. And I like to be polite, and somebody took me there trying to make me happy because they were so happy I came to speak, and they wanted to actually show me what good fish tastes like.
Right.
I had to tell the server that this was probably the worst mahi-mahi that I'd ever eaten.
Wow.
That it is not good. And I said, well, it wasn't good at all.
Mm-hmm.
And you should have known that as a server, that you do not serve this well. "Oh, you must have got the wrong mahi-mahi. They must have made a mistake." Okay. So fast forward this. I go back to Tampa, and it's the same thing. People say, "Well, what do you want to eat?" "Oh, I love fish, fresh fish, good fish." They take me to a restaurant. I walk in, and I have this eerie feeling, like I'm going back in time. I sit down. I go, "Wow, this is surreal." They come to me, and they say, "Well, what do you want to eat today?" And I say, "Well, what do you recommend?" And then I give them the same spiel. I'm from Hawaii. I know what fresh fish actually tastes like. I know how it should taste if it's cooked right, et cetera, et cetera. And they bring me out. They recommend also mahi-mahi at that restaurant. And I said, this defies natural law. Because over those 5 years, I began to realize that no one in the United States, even down in San Diego, knows how to cook mahi-mahi.
Okay.
It's a natural law. You do not order mahi-mahi. But for some reason, they conned me. I said, what do you recommend? They said, oh, our mahi-mahi is just unbelievable. So I order it. It comes. I taste it. It's terrible. Now, what the rest of the story is, the guy who takes me there, he also orders mahi-mahi. And not wanting to be rude, but I just told him, my dish is not good at all. I ask him, I don't normally ask my host if I can taste their food, but can I taste your mahi-mahi? He said, oh, you sure can. And mine is really good, so hopefully it'll make you happy. So I took a taste of his, and it was just as terrible. And then it dawned on me. I was back in the same restaurant that I'd eaten in 5 years earlier. I looked around. I said, this is the same restaurant.
That's fantastic.
But, until you know absolutely everything, you're going to make mistakes. But the way that you can minimize these, quote, mistakes and not meeting your expectations and being able to predict the future outcome is by simply going by a few natural laws. And so the natural law I now have is whenever I eat anywhere outside of the state of Hawaii, I do not order mahi-mahi. This is in Europe. This is in anywhere. They bring up mahi-mahi. I said, don't even think about it. Don't worry about it. I'm not going to eat that.
Okay, so let's say I have your same preference for fish. When I'm in Mesa, Arizona, where do I go eat?
In Arizona, now you know that we don't have a lot of fish that can walk through the desert.
Yeah.
So here in Arizona, I would recommend that you don't eat fish.
Okay, fair enough.
You're abiding by your natural law.
Absolutely. In fact, if anybody came and visited me, I would actually go out and buy the fish from somewhere where I know I can get it where it's still frozen, but it's fresh. So it's flash frozen. And I would bring it to my house and I would cook for them myself.
Okay.
And it would be 10 times better than probably the best restaurants in the area.
Well, that's great. And I believe you.
Yeah, no, it's true. It's a natural law.
It's a natural law.
So
my kids all know this.
Yeah.
So you went through that experience and you learned one of the natural laws, right? You observed and experienced and learned a natural law. You could have accomplished the same thing by just trusting an expert who would have said, don't ever eat mahi-mahi outside of the state of Hawaii, correct?
Yes.
So would you say that there is a value to learning natural laws for yourself or just to 100% rely on experts? So, for example, I have a friend who is probably the closest thing to a beer expert that I know. So when I go to a restaurant, I take a picture of the menu, I send it to him, and he tells me what to order. Therefore, I never really learn what's good or what's not. So I never actually learn the natural law.
Okay. You have a couple issues embedded in your question. The first question is it important to understand natural laws? And the answer is absolutely, it's important. The main problem we have in all our industries, and this isn't only in the construction industry, this is in every industry that we have on the face of the earth, is that people do not understand natural laws.
Yeah.
If I can say it more simply, the number of non-observant people, regardless of their level of education, are not very logical, do not understand natural laws, are more likely to put their brain and think in overdrive, and never truly understand what's going on around them. That is a natural law. If somebody can sit down and listen to somebody else who can explain and teach natural laws and make it simple, I don't know what the cost of that education should be.
Right.
But that's where you read some of the quotes out of some of my students. That's why they're saying that.
Yeah.
Because in a very short time, in listening to us talk about natural laws and teach them about reality, it completely has the capability to, quote, open their eyes and change the way they're thinking. So it's very important, I believe. Like, we have a conference once a year, and we have anywhere from sometimes 50 to 100 people, maybe 120 people, come and listen to us. Many of these people are probably non-observant. In other words, they don't understand why they're coming really and listening to me, and they don't appreciate the chance to listen to someone who actually understands natural laws.
Right.
But it's just totally unbelievable. If you actually wanted to be good in anything, you would always come to our conference and just sit there and listen, ask questions, listen some more. To understand natural laws will change your whole perspective on life. For example, if you understand this and you have an organization, whatever you might be, a vendor, sub-vendor, general contractor, doesn't make a difference. You would quickly understand that the number of experts you have are very few. You would then quickly say, if I have these experts, should I use them in their area of expertise, or should I make them do other stuff like admin, go to meetings, PR, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera?
Right.
You would quickly say, no, I need to utilize them in their area of expertise. Would you utilize these people in the middle of the projects, or at the end of projects?
At the beginning.
At the beginning. And if these people were actually experts, they could actually lay out the projects from beginning to end in a simple way. And would you keep these experts on those projects for the duration of the project?
No.
That'd be stupid. But I can actually tell you, there are people who I've educated, other people who don't understand what's going on in reality, do not understand what causes problems, who are making it a requirement that this vendor is legally responsible to keep that expert on that job, even if the project lasts for 2 or 3 years.
Yeah.
It's abuse.
Yeah.
It's a waste of expertise. That person will never last that entire project. They'll quit and go and work for somebody else.
Right. Yep.
But people just don't know how to do this. I can tell it to them, but they won't do it.
There's one kind of natural problem within the organization of your experts might know that they're an expert, and let's say it's a lower level in your organization, expect to be promoted to the next level because that's just what we view as our society, right? You promote your top performers, but therefore you're losing your expert at their expertise. How do you get around that mentality when their expectation is raise, promotion, because that's the next step on the ladder?
I was actually watching one of my favorite serials on television the other day. And I don't know if you've seen it, but it's a serial called Blue Bloods. Okay, and in this Blue Bloods, it really focuses around this one family where the grandfather used to be the commissioner of the police department of New York City and retired.
Okay.
The current commissioner is his son. And within the police department, the best detective is his oldest son. And the best patrolman they have is the youngest son. Well, the youngest son, because normally by natural law, as people get older, they tend to be better educators, more expert in what they do, explain things more simply. So in a birth order in a family, if you have 5 or 6 children, the most expert child in this environment would probably be the youngest. That's a natural law. You understand why, right? Because they have more information, they have less stress, they get loved more, everybody loves the baby.
Yeah.
They have no constraints because if they need something, one of their siblings or the parents would give it to them because it's not a financial constraint.
Right.
So the youngest are normally the most capable. The youngest son, Jamie, is being told by all his siblings, and one of the older siblings is also the assistant district attorney So you got like the commissioner, the former commissioner, an assistant district attorney, the best detective in the whole group in the New York Police Department. And then you have this younger guy. And this younger guy actually went to Harvard Law School and graduated. But he felt like he wanted to be a patrolman. And so he's working as a patrolman. And he's going around and doing really good things because he wants to do it for the right reason.
Right.
All his siblings, including his parents, his dad, because his mom passed away, and his grandfather are telling him, you're wasting your time. You need to get up the ladder.
Mm-hmm.
And one day, his father, who is the commissioner, current commissioner, sits him down and says, Jamie, you need to think about this. You know, you might be wasting your talents being a patrolman. You need to work your way up the ladder. You could be a great detective. No one would ever say that you don't have the capability because everybody knows you're capable. And his son asked his dad a couple questions. He said, Dad, does it get more political as you move up the chain? And the father says, absolutely.
Yeah.
He said, Dad, if you could turn back the hands of time, knowing that you could be a patrolman, you could be a detective, you could be a commissioner, when did you have the most fun? And the father said, when I was a patrolman.
Yeah.
So then the son asked him, if you could go back and change your decision-making with all the knowledge that you have, who would you be? And the father said, exactly who you are. Well, see, in society, not many people understand these things. So everybody's thinking, wow, you got to get promoted, you got to do this, you got to do that, right? But if I was the head of a vendor's organization or contractor, I would quickly realize that I have to identify and utilize expertise. I have to do it in a way that's acceptable in the environment of my company.
Right.
I would have to do it in a way that it maximized the profit to our company, also maximized the pay to my experts.
Right.
But at the same time, it created better value, and all the clients would realize that if we wanted what we want and we want good work, that we need to go to this vendor and utilize their expertise.
Yeah.
Is innovation in the world finding new natural laws, or is it a repackaging of existing ones that are known?
Think about this now. Do all the natural laws exist?
Yes.
Do all the conditions exist?
Yes.
What makes one person an observant, a visionary, and an expert, and another person a non-observant, non-expert in the same environment? Is the constraint that the information isn't there, or is the constraint in the actual person who either has the capability or doesn't have the capability? It's in the person, right?
Right.
Now, this goes even deeper. You're asking questions, right, without knowing where this is going. Okay, so let me ask you some questions now. Has everything I said made sense?
Yeah.
So you all buy in to every event has an initial condition and a final condition.
Yeah. And
how big can the event be? Can it be somebody's entire life?
Yeah, I think so.
Could it be a company's entire existence from the beginning of the company to when the company went out of business?
Yeah.
Sure.
Could it be the history of a country?
Yeah.
Could it be the whole history of the world?
It could be.
Now, let's stay right there. If we're looking at the history of the entire world, that tells us that it'll probably have a beginning point and an end point.
Yeah.
It tells us it can only happen one way. It tells us we will probably have more technology toward the end of the event or the beginning of the event.
Towards the end.
Yeah. It then tells you that if I had an observant person and a non-observant person, which one would more likely be born in the Dark Ages?
A non-observant.
Wow, you guys are so good at this. Does that make sense? So now we're talking about technology. We're talking about people. We are in the age of technology. We're also in the age of, quote, part of the history of mankind, which has to follow natural laws. So the majority of people are going to be non-observant. So therefore now, are we moving toward an age of more automation or less automation?
More automation.
More. Are we moving toward an age where people have to think more or think less?
Less.
Yeah, you got it. You put all those things together and you'll begin to see what's going to happen before it happens.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you can begin to see where so many people have inaccurate concepts in their head, but because they can't see into the future and because they can't picture what's going to happen tomorrow and the next day and the next day, they keep these inaccurate ideas in their head and repeat it day after day after day.
Yeah.
If you get away and move out and look at the whole history of mankind, has mankind learned from their past history? You have to say no. Why? Because if they actually learned something from the history of mankind, would they be more apt to go to war or less apt to go to war?
Yeah, less.
Yeah, less.
Yeah. Would they be more apt to try to change somebody else's country and control them?
No.
No. But they do it.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
See, and the problem with people actually in like a good size of population sample understanding this is that we have so few people who understand this. So therefore, as they're thinking, right, in their quote, almost like they have like 100 arrows in their pack and they're taking them out, right? Half the time or more, they're using broken arrows and don't even know it.
Right.
So it actually seems like they're moving forward, but they're not. Let me give you a good example. And this gets back to the fact that if you have some real popular ideas that's selling really well, it's more likely having ideas in those concepts that are inaccurate.
Right.
And I can give you a good one. There is a profound author. His name is Maxwell. He used to be a preacher, I believe, but he wrote this book like the 21 Points of Leadership.
Yep.
Okay.
Do you remember that book?
Yep, absolutely.
Oh, it's famous.
Yep.
So in one of these, quote, points of leadership, he talks about the law of attraction, which there are many people who talk about the law of attraction. Then another point of leadership is influence. Well, if you really think about this, what influence is that the person in question is being influenced or changed from the environment. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
But the law of attraction is this same person can never be influenced, but attracts the people who represents their thinking. The two ideas are like diametrically opposite of each other.
Yep.
Yeah.
But he's got it in there and people just go and teach it. And, it's just a marvel to watch. It reminds me of one of my sons. He was getting his master's degree and he was basically getting in that there is no such thing as influence. Influence is an inaccurate idea. And he used a lot of concepts from a lot of great authors. And one of them was Deming. And Deming always says there's no such thing as influence. You can't control and change people to become something else. You have to accept them for who they are. Well, they got into this argument and he had some really good professors. And the professors were asking him, well, how do you know this is absolutely true? And they said, let me give you an idea. Let's take SeaWorld and get a dolphin that's been trained to jump 20 feet in the air and then take the fish out of the trainer's hand. So are you saying, and his name was Jacob, right? They're saying, Jacob, are you saying that trainer had no influence over that dolphin jumping 20 feet in the air? And he said, that's what I'm saying. They said, how can you justify this? Because if you go out into the wild, you never see a dolphin jump 20 feet in the air to snare a fish. And he said simply, how do you know that a dolphin in the wild cannot jump 20 feet in the air and catch a fish? And their answer is, well, we just haven't seen it. And he said, because there's no need for a dolphin to jump 20 feet straight up and get a fish.
Right.
So they're not doing it.
Yeah.
And they were stunned by the simplicity of his answer.
Right.
So then one of the professors said, we noticed that you're quoting Deming quite a bit. Can't you say that you have been influenced by Deming?
Ah.
He thought about it and he said, no, I'm not influenced by Deming at all. He said, the only reason I used Deming was I knew that you respected Deming and everybody knows he's an expert. So I found the quote that he said to support what I believe.
Yeah.
He says, I wasn't influenced by Deming. Deming agrees with me. And the only reason I'd use Deming is so that you would accept the idea that I'm proposing.
Yeah.
You know, those are like phenomenal thoughts.
Right.
Do you read the news?
I do.
And do you immediately try to apply your philosophy to what's going on in the news?
Absolutely. Every morning, I don't read books because they take too long, right?
Yeah. Right.
And by the time you read it, this old stuff.
Yeah.
Plus, it's probably inaccurate. So I don't read many books at all anymore, unless somebody tells me this is a phenomenal book. If they tell me this is a phenomenal book, I'll take the book. I'll look at the first few pages. I'll look at the end. And if I can clearly understand what he's saying and it matches reality, I may read the book more.
Mm-hmm.
Very few books can do this.
What was the last one you read the whole book?
I can't even remember.
Okay.
The only books I remember reading where I really enjoyed it, and I knew it was a good book. One is a book called Out of Crisis. It's by Deming.
Okay.
In fact, I actually had a student go get all the, quote, visionaries, take IMT, which is Information Measurement Theory, and I asked them, your master's degree is simply to go down all their major ideas, and the one who disagrees with IMT the least, that's the guy who will identify as the visionary. And the only person they could identify was Edward Deming.
Wow.
I mean, he was outstanding. Okay, so anyway, I don't read a lot of books, but the last one that I would recommend, people say, well, what would you recommend? I'd say Edward Deming.
Edward Deming.
Okay.
Yeah, there's no doubt in my mind because he had so many accurate ideas. Other books that I would recommend, the Bible.
Yep.
Okay.
Because the Bible is profound.
Yep.
So those are the books that I would recommend.
Okay.
There's another one, but not a lot of people read it. The book is a book that is given away for free and can be downloaded off the internet. I believe the young man lived in the mid 1800s, and I believe he retired at like age 30. And I believe by 35, he had passed away.
Okay.
And the book is called As a Man Thinketh. And it's totally profound. And you can probably read it in under an hour and a half.
Huh.
And it's an unbelievable book. Otherwise, I now tend to ask anybody who knows of a good book to capture it in 4 or 5 PowerPoint slides and give it to me. Because as an older person, I only have 5 or 6 brain cells left, and I can't afford to burn any of them out.
Fair enough.
So my favorite saying is, to anybody I talk to, please make it simple and please don't make me think.
Yep. Yep.
If they can do that, I know I've found an expert.
So what website do you first go to in the morning?
Well, and I don't want to plug any of the websites, because the only reason I went to it is because it's the website I initially started with, and that's CNN.
Okay.
All right.
So I go to CNN and I quickly go through the history, the news of the day. And I look at internationally what's going on between countries. I look for dominant individuals and what they're saying. And then I always check on the financials. So I always go to the market
Okay.
and see how the stock market is doing.
Okay.
And then basically what I'm looking for are things that are very predictable, but people don't understand.
What's an example of that?
Okay, here we have a president whose name is Donald Trump.
Yep.
He's not a politician. He's a business person.
Mm-hmm.
I don't agree with everything he says, but he realizes that he's not accountable for anything that he says.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
He realizes it's a matter of PR and marketing.
Right.
He also realizes that there are more non-observant people than observant people in the world
Mm-hmm.
and in the United States. So watching him and how he operates is like totally amazing.
Right.
He says things which are like totally don't make sense, but it's maybe what the non-observant people want to hear.
Yeah.
But he realized, sure, I can say it. Don't tell me what I can't say and say. And basically, there are people who take an affront to this. And how people react to Donald Trump tells me their level of expertise and intelligence.
Yeah. Yeah.
So now we got guys, right, who are, quote, like NBA stars. And one of the guys I think who is an expert in what he does is our buddy in the Golden State Warriors, Steph Curry.
Steph Curry.
If you go back in Steph Curry's life, you'll begin to realize that he worked hard, but genetically, he was different.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he was open to different ideas. He was very injury prone. He sought out an expert. He always tried to see the future outcome. His discipline was amazing. If you go into some of his videos, especially the video that goes in where he was, I believe, a freshman or sophomore in college, and they brought all the best point guards in and looked at what he did and how the person who started the camp knew that he was going to be a star. It's simply amazing.
Yeah.
Well, and to your point about birth order and heredity, he was also the son of an NBA player.
Absolutely. It's genetic.
Right.
And as I keep watching him, I mean, he defers. He wants to win. He knows how to work with people. But the one mistake I thought he made was he said, I'm not going to visit the White House because I don't agree with President Trump.
Right.
That shows me, right, when he steps out of his area of expertise, he's a non-observant, non-visionary guy.
Right.
Am I making sense here?
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I like it.
And the second website I go to is ESPN.
Okay.
And why do I go to ESPN? Simply because I'm looking for dominant performers that if anybody was observant, they would know that this guy was really good.
Right.
And so I opened the website this morning and they have a piece on a guy named Smart who plays for Boston.
Yeah. Marcus Smart.
Marcus Smart. You know this fella.
Oh, yeah.
Sure.
We're NBA fans. We're from Chicago.
Okay, so
right.
Let's talk about Marcus Smart. Where did he come from? What university?
Oklahoma State.
So as he finished his college career out, did he have any issues?
It was bad stuff. It was maybe an abuse thing, or
Yeah, he had problems with his temper. He was violent. It wasn't a good picture.
right.
Okay, so he comes into the NBA. And I've watched him off and on because I like to track certain people.
Mm-hmm.
Well, he's with the Boston Celtics.
Yep.
And the Boston Celtics traded, what's that young guy's name?
Or no, they got Kyrie Irving. They traded away Isaiah Thomas.
Yeah, they traded away Isaiah Thomas. I look at that and I try to predict if that was a good move for the Celtics. And I have to believe that was an outstanding move.
Yeah.
Why? Because here's a young guy, a small guy. Yes, he had a phenomenal year, but over time, the smaller you are you going to have to work harder or be able to work less?
Yeah, harder.
Harder. More likely to get injured or less likely?
More likely.
Once you try to push the envelope and become who you're not, and try to do things that it's outside of your actual normal abilities, it's just not going to work out.
Yeah.
Now they get Kyrie in. And I watch Kyrie. Is he the best jump shooter?
No,
Probably not. But he is a clutch player.
Mm-hmm.
And because he's playing with other athletes, he is able to somehow have an awareness of how to drive to the basket and put the ball in the majority of cases, and be very successful.
Yeah.
And so I believe for the Boston Celtics, this was an unbelievable trade. So I'm watching what happens, and it's starting to play out.
Yeah, it really is.
And so I like watching this. I mean, I like to watch why people can't understand what's going to happen in the future. Now, will they become, quote, the world champion? That I don't have enough information on. But as you begin to watch these athletes, you begin to understand the difference between people who can see into the future and people who can't.
Yep.
So let's go to football. Let's go to the NFL. If you had to identify a quarterback who seems to have all the tools, but then makes major blunders in things that he says and his actions, who would you pick out?
Cam Newton.
Cam Newton.
Yeah.
That guy is so skilled, such an expert. But when put on the big stage, he loses his composure.
Yeah. He's got a bad pattern of it right now.
Very bad pattern. But his skills are phenomenal. But he just shows that he's not the complete package.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost like if somebody could actually change his mind a little, they could really help him. Now, if you were to pick somebody now who doesn't seem to be like a superstar like Cam, that doesn't have the total physical attributes, but is just so smart at what he does, who would you pick?
I'd say Tom Brady.
Tom Brady.
Tom Brady. And if you looked at his metrics, they're unbelievable. In fact, he would have had 2 more Super Bowls had the New York Giants not come up with unbelievable catches, right? That changed the games in 2 Super Bowls. He would not have had, how many does he have? 5 today?
I think he's got 5.
6.
What natural law allowed, who's the receiver, the New York Giants receiver, to catch the ball on top of his head like that?
Odell Beckham.
The natural law is those receivers were phenomenal.
Yeah.
They're absolutely phenomenal. And one of those guys is, he's still playing, right?
Odell Beckham.
Odell Beckham. And you'll hear people talk about him like they're not human.
Yeah.
But it's a natural law that happened simply because I saw it happen.
Yeah.
Right.
If it didn't happen, then we know that it shouldn't have happened. But if it happened, it happened. And all things happen only one way. Well, let me get back to where I started from. Marcus Smart. Here's a kid, exuberant, puts in 200% of effort. Yeah, everybody knew he had kind of like a temper problem. Very aggressive. Would you agree with me?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Very aggressive. Well, there's an article in today's ESPN about Marcus Smart that, bar none, if you actually took the performance metrics and looked at it, that he is one of the most valuable players on the Boston Celtics team.
Mm-hmm.
Huh.
Even though his percentage might be like 30% shooting percentage or 35%. When he is on the floor, all the metrics show that the Boston Celtics get the most out of any player when he's on the floor. And if you take a look at that, right, you begin to see, wow, they have all the metrics, right? He's on the floor, he's off the floor, his shooting percentage, how many points, etc. But when he's on the floor, the plus points that he brings the team, I believe, is the tops on the Boston Celtics.
You're a fan of the plus minus statistic.
Well, I'm a fan of it simply because it's by observation. You get into a complex situation. All you can understand is when a certain individual gets in there and when a certain individual's not there.
Right.
who brings the biggest plus.
Well, and it kind of aligns with your philosophy because it's the most simple metric.
It is. And you don't have to think about it. You don't have to argue about it. You don't have to say, wow, it's his teammates. It's, this, it's that. And no, it's just very simple. He has the biggest plus.
Yeah. Oh, that's a great application, actually.
Oh, it is. In fact, I was so amazed at the article myself that I'm going to use it as an exercise for classes when I teach.
That's great.
You read the financial news, so you're up on that, and you're applying natural laws, your understanding of natural laws and leaders who understand best value and to financial news.
Yes.
Tesla's leadership management and some of the news that's come out about them, best value, understanding natural laws or not?
I don't know. And the reason I say I don't know is because I actually rode in a Tesla at the Schiphol airport.
Okay.
See, at Schiphol Airport in Europe, they have much more cognizance about our environment than here in the U.S.
Yeah.
Every organization wants to be more environmentally friendly. So one of the moves they made is all the official cabs are Teslas.
Okay.
So I rode in one of them. Wow, amazing. But as I look at Tesla, the company, and what's going on, I'm thinking, is there a chance that this vehicle is not the optimal vehicle, either for the environment or for, individuals?
Right.
I actually bought a Toyota Previa.
Okay.
Have you seen that car? It's like a hybrid.
Mm-mm.
Well, it's actually, my wife bought it. She said, honey, it's a good car and it's a hybrid, so it makes use of electricity and it recharges the battery and da-da-na-na-na-na-na. And so I said, well, go ahead and buy it because the natural law, the biggest natural law that impacts that situation where my wife wants to buy a Tesla is whatever she wants, I should let her do it. It doesn't matter what it is, right?
Yep. So
anyway, we get this Tesla. Then over time, she begins to see that there are problems with the Previa. It's like the technology is good, but it hasn't been fully developed.
Right.
And so they're finding problems. You got to do this, you got to do that. And it's very costly, right? Because basically it's technology. And she begins to see that it might not be a good idea to buy technology when it first comes out.
Yeah.
So let's switch over now to the Teslas. Okay, I'm riding it, right? And I'm in Europe, and I'm very cognizant of what's going on. I heard an idea that instead of the car, which is really the most profound thing, or turning the car into electronics, right?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it's the smartphone that is the advanced technology.
Yeah.
And if I could get a smartphone and just slap it in a car, I could have a very high-performing automobile and get all the technology that they get out of the Tesla.
Huh.
Yeah.
In fact, the smartphone now in the Netherlands not only has the, quote, GPS, but it actually controls moving in garages and everything else.
Huh.
And you begin to see, oh my goodness, if I'd spent all my time developing, putting all the high tech into the dashboard, why not just, quote, let the smartphone guys put it in a small smartphone where that smartphone, when the next generation comes out, I throw that away, I get the new one.
Right.
Huh.
And it can control everything.
The scale of smartphone production is so much larger. You can get through the curve much quicker than you can on a car.
Yeah. And it's the idea of, like, for example, taking the cab, right? The Lyfts and Uber. I mean, it takes all the problems away. I mean, so basically now, it's amazing watching technology.
Yeah.
So my proposal now is when somebody asks you, what do you think of their leadership or their technology? There's several things I know because of natural law. Number one, anybody who develops technology is a visionary.
Mm-hmm.
The biggest part about being a visionary is not only the technology, but the business aspect of it.
Mm-hmm.
And money plays so much. For example, Steve Jobs.
Yep.
Have you ever seen the autobiography on Steve Jobs?
No, I didn't watch that one.
Oh, you have to buy it. I think it's like $5 and watch that thing from beginning to end.
Okay.
Have you heard of Albert Einstein?
Yeah.
Yeah. Have you seen the 10 shows on Albert Einstein that go through the beginning of his life to the end?
I haven't.
Oh, you need to go watch that.
Watch those. All right.
Yes, because Steve Jobs and Albert Einstein have two things in similarity. Both of them were into high tech.
Mm-hmm.
Both of them were intent on discovering our physical world and how they could like put technology and understand technology, understand reality. But both of them were miserable failures in the things that mean the most to a lot of people.
Right.
Yeah.
Which is people.
Uh-huh.
Right.
Both of them were abusive. Both of them, when in the days that they died, it was almost like it's a travesty.
Mm-hmm.
Amazing. So, you know, I just have been so blessed with like picking these people out, looking at the dominant information, and then seeing if I could say, who would I model my life after today?
Yeah.
Very simply, do you think an expert with certain expertise or somebody who can identify and utilize expertise, who do you think is more valuable?
Utilizing expertise.
You got it.
Yeah.
You can stand on the shoulders of giants.
Thereby, the last book that I put out is How You Can Know Almost Everything Without Knowing Anything.
Yeah.
Okay.
I actually believe that the expertise itself is valuable, but it's not the most valuable thing. It is the people who know how to identify and utilize that expertise to help everyone. That's truly valuable.
Yeah.
Well, that's great.
Yeah. If you had to compare or contrast Costco versus Walmart's application of best value, do you have any comment on that? I mean, Walmart, you know, historically is a very price-driven, abusive to suppliers type company, which would seem contrary to your best value approach.
Yes. Everything happens for a reason. Is that not correct?
Mm-hmm.
Is anybody in the world truly being abused? In other words, right, do you believe that people are accountable for their own life?
Yes.
If I take an abuser and I take somebody who's being abused, which one is more wrong? Well, I would say that the abuser and people who are getting abused are partners in crime. See, because if everything can happen only one way, somebody who is being abused is only being abused because they feel comfortable with being abused.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
In other words, you know, they've made studies of this, right? They find somebody who's being abused, they lock up the abuser, they give rehabilitation to the person being abused, and then they think the person's okay now, so they let them go. Then they check up on them periodically, and they find out in a couple of years that that person is in another relationship with somebody who, quote, is abusing them.
Yep.
And they always ask why. And by observation, the reason is very simple. It's because they feel comfortable in that situation.
Yep.
Yeah.
And they actually need the abuser. So this answers a whole litany of issues. For example, if you're an observant person, would you more likely be born in a country that's like the United States, or would you more likely be born in a country where there was a dictator?
United States.
You guys are experts. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So now let's look at Walmart and let's look at Costco. You know, I don't know, I don't have enough details, but I can tell you that I try to go to other stores rather than Walmart
Mm-hmm.
if I have the opportunity, simply because I like to see competition.
Yeah.
And I don't like to see a large organization actually abusing supplier chains.
Yeah.
But it's all part of reality. It's what happens,
Mm-hmm.
right? So is it wrong? No, it's just what it is.
Mm-hmm.
And so Walmart, Yes, they abuse the supply chain. In construction, should general contractors abuse the subcontractors?
No.
But they do.
Uh-huh.
And it's not fully realized. Anybody who's very observant of the construction industry realizes that as we get more high tech, that the major, quote, value-added systems in a building are the electronics. It's the controls of temperature.
Yeah.
And it's maybe the piping systems. But when an owner goes and wants to buy services, do they go to the people who will impact his building the most? Or do they go to a general contractor who knows very little about all the systems?
Yeah, general contractor.
Yeah, isn't that interesting? I mean, this world is like just not logical. Now, I got another question for you. If you were trying to buy building services, trying to buy a building a state-of-the-art building, would you want your contractor or contractors to form teams and to work together to lower the costs? Or would you like to buy services from a contractor who at the last minute took the low prices in all the different areas?
Yeah.
Yeah, form teams.
Yeah, definitely form teams.
You form teams. But what's the majority natural law of how owners buy systems?
Lowest
They're
price.
buying it from contractors who put their teams together at the very last minute, not even knowing if their submittal actually covers what the owner has required. I mean, what type of industry do we have? It's amazing.
Right.
On Walmart and Costco, I actually love it when people identify and utilize expertise and pay a fair price.
Yeah.
And that's what the best value is all about.
Yep. Overrated or underrated working with family members? Do you think we see too many family businesses or not enough? Is best value promote family business, or is it say, no, you know what, in a way you're sourcing labor and you should source labor from experts?
Oh, that's a really good question. It's interesting because I actually work with a company now that 3 of the major players are my sons.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
But the reason I work with them is because they actually understand my mind.
Yeah.
Because the best value approach was developed with these kids, and these kids grew up with it.
Yeah.
They're thinking like this. And so I actually have 3 other very smart gentlemen who work with my sons. I would have to say that my sons right now are worth 3 times as much.
Okay.
Yep.
Even though I pay them the same.
Yeah.
So in that application, I believe that working in a family is a good thing. But remember, there are many organizations that don't operate for this reason. So they're family owned. And a lot of times, many of the family people who work in the company may not be experts and may not be, quote, good for the business.
Right.
But this world is so large, and I don't know everyone, and everything happens for a reason. So if you're in a family-owned organization, it's probably the right thing. If you're in a non-family-owned organization, you're probably in the right organization.
Right. That's a good answer.
Yeah.
So you would say a child coming into a family business is more valuable or more of an expert because of the initial conditions that they were born into that particular family that ran the business. Would that be accurate to say?
I would try to believe that if you had a family and you had, let's say, 8 kids like I did, that the younger kids would probably be more valuable in the business than the older kids.
Interesting.
Simply because the older kids probably were raised at a time when there were less resources.
Yeah.
They were more controlled. There were more expectations and more stress, more into details. It wouldn't have fit in my family organization. As far as our family, quote, own business. Does that make sense?
That does. That makes sense.
But it is the identification and utilization of expertise. That's what it comes down to. So if I was to look at it totally different, if I found the expertise outside of my family, I would immediately hire them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if somebody in my family said, well, why are we hiring them? Because they have expertise and you don't.
Yeah.
Somebody who's totally visionary begins to realize that their family is just a unit and organization that gives them experience in understanding who people are. The visionary or the observant person will begin to understand that everyone who they interface with in this world is as important as their own family members.
Yeah.
So people who have more value to organizations are people who treat everybody based on who they are and not because of they're my family or they're my friend or something else.
Yep. Yep. That's a good point.
So imagine you have top 300 CEOs in a room and you've got an hour to teach them the 3 most important things that they should need to know how to run their company successfully. What do you tell them?
Well, I'd probably tell them that if they know how to identify and utilize expertise, that they would be the top in their class. The next thing I would try to tell them or expose them to is that they should never try to change anybody, because the more they try to change people, their risk goes up.
Yeah.
So they shouldn't try to radically change their organization in any way. Then the third thing I try to tell them is, if they would like to change and be more sustainable, that they would go back to the first point and they would always identify certain experts that they have and put them in a different component and allow them to utilize their expertise and proliferate the concepts among a very small group. And as time wore on, they could use that, quote, technology that helped them become successful in other parts of the company.
Yeah.
But I would never try to change my company. I would never try to or radically change. I would take new concepts, identify expertise, and utilize that expertise within a smaller component, not threatening my major organization, because every organization has more non-observant people than observant people.
Right.
And basically, do not try to change or control any other entity, because in the end, all that's going to lead to, they may gain in the short run, but in the long run, they'll find out that it's not an accurate concept. It normally can be looked at as abuse. In our own personal lives, the less we abuse other people, the better off I think we'll be.
Right.
In all your work at doing consulting and actually working with companies, do you have like a rock star example of a company who heard this and implemented it perfectly? And if so, who was it within the organization who's the expert, and how did they get the most value out of them?
You know, I do know of a company, and it's kind of strange, but we go into the Netherlands. It's an IT company. The name of the company is Schuberg Phillips.
Okay.
And they came to me because they heard of our best value approach. And in an industry that has very low success rates, only 25% of projects are actually come in on time, on budget, where the clients are satisfied. It's a terrible performing industry. They had no management, no control over anybody in the company. Everything was voluntary. And their performance metrics were unbelievable. They were off the chart. I would think that in all the organizations I've seen, that was the most successful organization I've seen that applied best value concepts.
Do you have an example of a really bad implementation?
When you say example of a bad implementation, what are we talking about?
Promoting experts, I guess. An explanation of a firm who does all the, direct manage control things, and what a concrete example would have been.
Oh, of where it doesn't work?
Right. Yeah. Well, somebody who just did it all wrong. You gave them advice and they did it all wrong.
But, there's so many of those that it's a blur in my mind.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But, we haven't actually taken an organization over time, whether it be a public institution or a private institution, and had enough of an opportunity to reach somebody who actually could understand what we're proposing. So I may not be qualified to answer that question.
Yeah, okay.
But there are many bad implementations because people like the idea of identifying and utilizing expertise, but they cannot, in the average normal human being cannot release control, cannot relax and allow the experts to do their job.
Yeah.
And don't like transparency. And they love to think and make decisions. So this is the majority of society.
Yeah.
Rapid fire. How many hours do I sleep a night?
Yep.
If I'm not jet lagged, 5 or 6 hours is plenty.
All right.
Oh, wow.
When do I wake up? Normally between 4 and 5.
Okay.
What is the best book you've ever read? Well, I don't read many books anymore, so nothing comes to my mind. What is the best book you've ever read in the last year? Once again, it's the same answer. What is your favorite restaurant? I eat fish, but I'm a vegetarian. So the rule is, if it had eyes and walks, I don't eat it.
Okay.
So my favorite restaurants are restaurants that I can either get fish, where I have my choice of what I want to eat and how I want to eat it. So my 2 favorite restaurants, one is called Sweet Tomatoes.
All right.
And the other one is one that people are shocked at, but it's Golden Corral.
All right. Because you get to choose.
People don't like it because it's a buffet, and the people who come in, a lot of people don't like. They think the people overeat. They're messy. It's not a good environment, but I love it because they have certain vegetables that I love that I can pick, and I don't touch like 60% of their food bar. So
there you go. All right.
Yeah. What is something you believe that few others do? Well, it's IMT. It's everything happens just one way. People are predisposed.
Yeah.
People are very predictable, and you cannot influence or control other people. What is my favorite quote? Today it is, please don't make me think.
All right. Our the next section is, so we let people know that we were doing this interview with you, and we got back a couple questions from people within the industry or experts in this industry. So the first is from Bill Michaels. He's the founder and CEO of Proliferate Consulting.
Yes.
And he said, the biggest issue in procurement for construction execs is around a labor shortage. With people leaving the trades, immigration law changes, and young people showing little interest in joining the skilled trades, finding contractors who have labor to complete jobs is difficult. How will the construction industry deal with this issue?
The industry, as far as I'm concerned right now, is very unstable. It's also very abusive. Good training is now accepted as on-the-job training.
Yeah.
It's not very safe simply because the people aren't good at what they do. So they get into more accidents. How should people who are construction executives figure this out? They should have a team and a B team, and they should cost it accordingly. And their biggest issue has nothing to do with them. Their biggest issue is the clients who actually are buying services, who cause risk that the contractors cannot control. That is the biggest issue. It's nothing to do with the contractors.
Yeah.
When we actually create a very transparent environment where the contractors actually control the project to deliver what they propose they can deliver because they're the expert, the change order rate as far as time and cost is under 1% that's caused by the vendor.
Wow.
And most people don't even know this. So they actually think that there's a problem in the industry because there are not enough people who are good at what they're doing.
Interesting.
Yes, it's like a totally misperceived problem. And the risk is actually being caused not by the industry, but by the clients who buy the construction services.
So how would you suggest a contractor goes about changing that? If the client is the one paying for the service and quote unquote calling the shots because they're spending the money.
Yes.
How do contractors change that?
Simply in understanding that owners actually want to identify and utilize expertise. So basically, every job can turn into a best value job if once a contractor gets the job, that they sit down with the owner and lay out everything from beginning to end, make it simple, identify the risk that they don't control, and have a risk mitigation plan, making it very clear that risk cannot be, quote, passed to other parties. It can only be mitigated. And if contractors actually have expertise and do this, the problem completely goes away.
Okay.
Yeah, this is what the industry doesn't understand. So they're always coming to me asking for these solutions on, like the unions have these problems, and I keep telling them what the answers are. They're very straightforward and simple. It's transparency.
Yeah.
And if the contractors can create transparency, every job turns into a best value job. And 90% of all risk is actually caused by the owner.
Yeah.
And the industry doesn't even realize that and doesn't have, quote, the intelligence to understand what to do to counteract that.
Next question we got is from Judy Whipple, professor at Broad College of Business in the Department of Supply Chain Management. How do you think 3D printing will change the construction industry and its supply chain in the future?
You have to understand the problem that causes risk is human behavior that's very risky. It's not anything that happens, I believe, on the construction site with, quote, if you had, fairly expert vendors.
Uh-huh.
Like for BIM, right, which is, I think, what you're talking about here.
Yeah.
The major advantage for BIM is that once you put it in this BIM approach, this program, everything's fixed. So you can't change anything.
Right.
So when you can't change it, which is how the client causes problems, it minimizes, I would say, 80 to 90% of all problems. And I actually know of a company in the Far East that did this. And their boss he was visionary, but he was he made decisions continually and forced his team to react to his decisions. Somebody brought BIM in, and he wanted everything to be automated because he felt like people weren't doing a good job because they couldn't react to his changes. But the only way to make BIM successful is that you don't make changes.
Right.
So that by implementing BIM, they stopped him from constantly micromanaging.
Yeah.
And it's that caused their BIM system to be successful. And people don't see this. It's the human behavior that causes risk that is going to be impacted as people start trying to use technology.
And BIM creates better human behavior because it forces them to be more like a program.
Yeah, it's like architects, right? Architects are always being abused. Well, the only reason they're being abused is they never tell the owner when they can talk, why they're talking, and let them talk to express their ideas at the right time. When you don't tell people when they can talk and why they're talking, they're going to talk all the time.
Right. Right.
And see, that's what causes the architects and engineering issues. It's not because we don't have the expertise. It's because somebody doesn't understand the environment. So how is it going to change the construction industry and its supply chain in the future? Well, it's going to be very hard changing the supply chain unless we get the client to stop doing the risky human behavior that they do.
Yeah.
In other words, how do you stop risky human behavior? You minimize all human behavior that manages, directs, and controls another entity, whether it be in the contractor's company, whether it be in the supply chain. Anybody who is managing, directing, controlling is out of there. And that causes all the problems.
That makes sense.
Yeah. It's not a technical problem. It's a human problem.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's great.
That's great. Thank you very much.
Hey, take care.
All right, thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to Conversations Around the Corner, produced by WallProtects, the designer and manufacturer of wall protection products for healthcare, hospitality, or any commercial building. Be sure to subscribe in iTunes or Stitcher and tune in next week where we will have another conversation around the corner.